A very good morning to all the delegates of the Kuala Lumpur International PR Conference 2021. My name is Hemant Gaule, and I'm a part of the School of Communications and Reputation, an institute of PR based in Mumbai, India. And today I'm going to be talking to you about data and communications, a field of study that I personally find very, very fascinating. And I'm going to be discussing with you some of the perils of communicating with data and how to avoid them. At the outset, let me start by asking you a question. I'm sure you know who this gentleman is and the presentation that he's delivering. That's Al Gore, the former presidential candidate, giving a very presidential presentation on climate change. This was such a powerful presentation that it also earned him a Nobel Peace Prize, heavily loaded with data with insights from the best scientists across the world. However, several years later, there are still people who don't believe that climate change is real. Clearly, a great storytelling mechanism loaded with good quality data is in itself not enough. There has to be more to it. The challenge, as we will reveal through the course of my keynote, is that we have been generating a lot more data than we are generally able to process and generally able to translate into a good storytelling technique that connects with all audiences. So let's take a look at what we've got here. Let's start by looking at the evolution of data in marketing communications. We have come a long way when it comes to data that is available to us communicators. 50 years ago, we were even lucky to have data on the number of people subscribing to newspapers or owning television sets as a measure of the influence and reach that we are creating. 30 years ago, we had pretty rich consumer preferences, thanks to a lot of research agencies using some increasingly sophisticated methods of research. So far, so good. But it was the advent of internet and mobile technology that really disrupted the way we look at data. Suddenly, we had so much information on our communications and audiences that with time, we started to measure every aspect of our communication, including the content that we communicate with and how it creates influence. We have actually gone from broadcasting to narrowcasting. We have gone from no data to big data. And the more we consume content digitally, the more time we spend on our mobile devices and other electronic devices, the more information we deliver to these platforms, and some really rich information too. Let me give you an example. Just take out your cell phone, unless you are watching this presentation on your cell phone. Pick any mobile application, ideally a social media application, and check out the number of permissions that you have provided to this applications. From your location to the contents of your messages, from your financial information to who your real friends are, the information being tracked is absolutely incredible. And therefore, marketing communications today is driven by data that is so solid and customer information that can be captured at every stage of the buying process that we don't need to guess what people want. We just need to know where to look for it. And once we know where to look for it, there are four ways that we can use this data. Audience, giving insights on who our stakeholders are and how they are engaging with us. Messages, crafting the right message for our audiences. Medium, delivering that message in the most effective way. And finally, measurement of the impact that we create through our communication. Let's take a look at each of them individually. With time, we have been able to build an increasingly accurate profile of our stakeholders. Thanks largely to digital platforms, you can track a number of things about them, from what issues your investors are reading about to the journey that your user takes on your website, therefore making it very easy to understand the specific needs of your stakeholders and addressing them in the most effective way. Let me give you an example. Uh, they say that India is crazy about three things: cricket, Bollywood, and politics. And sometimes you see some pretty innovative applications of communications in all three of them, specifically Indian politics. Indian voter bases are not only incredibly large in number, but they are extremely diverse as well, with 30 states and 20 official languages, more than 1,500 unofficial languages. Um, this is a very, very diverse demography that most politicians speak with. And the needs and expectations of the voters change as well based on who they are and where they are. It's almost impossible and, quite frankly, not a good idea to consider Indian voters as the same. So naturally, you can't use the same message and the same communications techniques with all of them. So, how do you understand what to say to whom? One of India's leading political outfits managed in India to create 10 profiles of their voters based on where they live and who they are. They did that by combining data available with government offices and the facilities available to the people in certain locations. With the data they collected on what were their primary expectations from the government. So there was data already available and some data that they collected that they combined to customize their messaging to the specific needs of these audiences. So 10 different kinds of voter profiles receiving 10 different kinds of messages. Obviously, this was very, very successful. And this is also a really good case study on how unique messages are delivered to a unique set of audiences that work extremely well on them. Another good example of messaging is Amazon's AI-based email platform that customizes email characteristics such as subject lines and content of the email and the specific discounts and offers being shared with different kinds of audience profiles depending on their specific user behavior on the website and on the mobile application. So each customer actually receives an email that has been customized and optimized for them to take an action on that email. The next application of that is medium, choosing the right medium to deliver the content that you are using for communications. Once you know your audience, you know the message that you want to convey, you get to the medium through which you will convey it. And the right usage of data can help you go beyond the usual means of reaching out to your audiences and make that process extremely effective. I want to take an example of an Indian brand of soap called Synthol that you see on one side of the screen there, and an agency called Clan Connect that specializes in influencer management. With the onset of the pandemic, a lot of Indians were forced to quit their traveling, and there was a general sentiment of not being able to explore as much as they were able to before. Brands wanted to collaborate with influencers in order to convey that message and that collaborative sentiment. And generally, as you might know, influencer hiring exercise is pretty standard. You see the content that they are posting on. Normally, the brand includes some of the work that they have done with them in the past as well. And you see the reach and engagement of those influencers, and you pick the best ones in that regard. And you can obviously see the pitfalls of this mechanisms of selecting influencers for conveying your communication, because they could be manipulation of data, of reach and engagement. You end up typecasting the communication that each influencer makes, and you end up segregating your audiences and really narrowing your audience down. So, in the case of Synthol, for example, the brand could have gone with travel influencers and ended up speaking to a very specific group of people who like to travel and not necessarily explore, which was the message that they wanted to convey in the first place. So, this brand went a step further. They found and analyzed their audiences and found the common factors and therefore the common influencers. So instead of looking at only the influencers themselves, they went to the audience, to the customers of this soap brand. They found them on social media. They looked at the common characteristics of their audiences and looked at the influencers that they all shared. And this is obviously a huge amount of data. They looked at a bunch of other factors as well, such as location tags, and they combined all this data together to find and really pinpoint the influencers that really worked. And this agency was able to do it because they have invested heavily in artificial intelligence and machine learning. This agency has actually been acquired by an Indian PR firm, and which was the first case study of a major Indian PR firm investing in artificial intelligence. And this agency specifically called it digital persona mapping, not just mapping the brand with the audiences, but mapping the audiences with the influencers as well. which is a little more accurate. The next application of data is measurement of the outcomes. And we have gone beyond the surface level metrics of awareness, clicks, reach, etc. We have to go beyond, not only because these metrics can be manipulated, but we can't assume anymore that they are the measure of communications outcomes. As our world of reputation becomes more and more complex and our stakeholders become more and more complex, it is not enough to look at just the surface level metrics of reputation management. You have to go beyond and you have to see how those specific metrics work together. So, in the case of this major Indian conglomerate named Godrej, instead of looking at the number of customers that they were able to reach out to every month, instead of looking at metrics such as share of voice or add value equivalent, they created their own metrics and some really complex ones as well, such as contribution to national building, the CEO profiling, and the positiveness of the CEOs and the other leadership. Not only that, they created an architecture where they were able to compare it with other major Indian conglomerates as well. So you see that with a certain kind of a focus and a certain kind of an investment, clearly data can help you communicate a message in a certain manner, reach out to audiences in the most effective way, and measure the outcomes that genuinely matter. That being said, this huge amounts of data presents a lot of issues and challenges for us. And this is the pickle that we are in today. And I want to discuss some of those with you. And I have, for the purpose of simplicity and the purpose of this presentation, I have identified 5 areas where data can pose a challenge. The first one is too much data. And this is something that we see a lot of communicators becoming overwhelmed by, because once they start their journey into data management, data analytics, and marketing analytics, they realize that there's so much data already available related to the audiences that they speak with and the engagement that they create online, that it becomes really difficult to understand how does so much data work together. The second big challenge is that the data is really unstructured. It's not just the issue of the data being spread across platforms. The data is also spread over a period of time. There is duplication of audiences across platforms, and there are different goals of each kind of platform and each kind of campaign. How do you combine all of that together so that there is no duplication of effort? How do you combine these variables together in a way that it does not conflict with the actual ROI that you are trying to measure? One of the biggest challenges, therefore, is that there are too many metrics, and which leads to something called attribution confusion. Calculating true ROI is difficult because marketeers can no longer attribute or credit a reputation to a single factor or a single activity where consumers are engaging with them, and they are engaging with them across multiple channels of communications. So to what extent do you, for example, regard a Facebook post versus a PR activity? To what extent do you regard a CEO's interview in a major publication to a viral campaign that you did online? To what extent have these activities contributed to the reputation or any other goal of your communications? That is a very difficult metric to decide. That's a very difficult conclusion to draw, and typically something that emerges after a lot of conversations by the communications teams of themselves. Another big challenge is too much noise, and not just marketeers in this manner. The users, the consumers, and our stakeholders are also overwhelmed by the amount of information that they receive, and so many brands trying to influence them all the time. And therefore, how do you create influence with so much noise happening? And how do you at the same time strike a balance between communicating just the right amount with your audiences and the audiences not perceiving that you are going overboard with the communication that you're making? One of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, is that things are changing too fast. The kind of data that you gather is changing too fast. The way in which you gather it is changing too fast, and the consumer preferences, the way people interact with your brand, the what they expect out of your brand is also changing really fast. Yesterday's tactics do not work today, and the so-called shelf life of marketing practices continues to decrease, and companies realize that their old messages are no longer as relevant as they were before. Uh, and sometimes what happens is, and it's happened in my experience also quite often, that a lot of marketeers end up creating really smart campaigns, but by the time the campaigns mature, the trend based on which, the insights on which the campaign was created, is already a little too old for it to be effective. So the outcome, the result of all of these 5 major perils is that there are too many choices. So many possible channels are available for communications that marketeers struggle to make the best choices regarding strategy, tactics, and dollars invested. There are too many choices of the nature of data that is available to you. Integrating that data is becomes difficult. In fact, integrating all of these campaign efforts becomes really difficult. And the more varied, the less integrated a campaign is, the more difficult is it to capture data. And like we saw, you will end up with too many metrics, and it's so difficult to combine all those data platforms together to synthesize a common understanding of what's going on. Another underlying aspect that leads to these perils is that, despite so many changes, so many rapid advancements happening, and the general awareness of the industry increasing about data and marketing analytics, there is a general lack of understanding across disciplines, on technology and data, and more specifically, the philosophy of measurement and data. More than ever, companies need people now to understand both the art and science of marketing data, and how to use that in strategy, in creative, in messaging, in technology, in generally in campaign management, all the way up to senior management. This is not an issue specific to only executive level employees, but also leadership. And as we will see, that there's a big chunk of the solution emerges from the extent to which the leadership believes in this kind of data philosophy. So, what's the solution to these 5 pitfalls? Well, I have three recommendations that I can make based on my experiences and my counseling that I've done here in India. The first one is to simplify. More specifically, simplify your data and your KPIs. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by all the data that's available to you, but what is important to understand and really practice is that you need to confirm your KPIs before you embark on an exercise. And it's really tempting to sometimes jump onto the complex aspects of data and how the data can influence your strategy and what you'll learn from that data and apply into a communication strategy. It's really tempting, especially for smart marketeers like yourselves. But if you're embarking on this journey, it's really important to start slow and start small, so that you don't end up with the peril of too much information, too many metrics that you don't know what to do with. Deter- Determine what types of data can have a positive impact on your campaign strategy, on your marketing communications. Leave out the data that won't be used to improve the effectiveness of your strategy. Leave it behind and focus only on gathering data around the KPIs that that can really move the needle, that can really help you improve the effectiveness of your communications. And therefore, for any campaign, for any brand that is only now embarking on their communications journey, we always recommend them to start small and start with very simple KPIs. And that is an aspect that must be reflected in reporting as well. When we work with complex dashboards, there's really no need to make your dashboards and your reporting architecture really complex. Don't aim to achieve the best case scenario in one go. Data, the way data philosophy works as well, is an ongoing improvement process. And that's the core thing that we need to understand. For that to be in place, we need to invest in people and machines. You will need the help of people who bring that philosophy of measurement, continuous improvements, and thinking in terms of variables and be able to work with data. You will need those people, and this is part of the reason why communications firms in India, I'll give you one evidence of it, are increasingly hiring engineers or those from data science backgrounds, something that we did not see maybe 5 years ago. Uh, Folks from such backgrounds can recognize the value of large amounts of data. And at the same time, you must also invest in systems that will be able to process such large amounts of data. And this is actually another step in simplifying your work by making the algorithms and machines work for you. And when you don't have to apply that amount of work as such, the example that we saw of the AI machine engine client connect identifying influencers, they were able to do that process, by the way, across 300 influencers, looking at their geotags and looking at all the data that is available, publicly available. They were able to pull that data out in 10 minutes. If we rely on traditional engines and traditional frameworks to analyze that amount of data, we will actually end up taking more time than we need to. And it will actually end up becoming a very expensive exercise in terms of times and resources. So that's my second recommendation. Start investing in people and machines in a small way, but certain way. My final recommendation on this aspect is to develop your own reputation framework. Just like your KPIs are unique and how they influence your reputation is unique, or any other aspect of your business and the goal of your campaign, all of that is unique. Your The reputation framework that you use that decides how these metrics, how the data that you're working with synthesizes itself into the reputation, that has to be unique as well. This is not a one size fits all situation. There is a agency called Impact Measurement and Research based in India. They are a communications analytics firm, and I highly recommend you to look them up and look up the work that they are doing. They're also a part of AMEC, the Association of Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. And they're one of their most popular framework of reputation is one where they have a basic equation available, which uses the same data all the time. But for each client, for each campaign, for each project, the variables in that communication equation hold a different weightage depending on the situation. So it's never a one solution provided to all clients. That brings me to the end of my keynote. I hope some of these philosophies have been useful to you. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and I will be happy to any questions that you may have. My thanks to the organization team for inviting me. It was my pleasure to speak to all of you. Thank you and stay safe.